Welcome to NASDAQ Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at NASDAQ. Joining me is John Phillips, co-founder of PredictIt, to discuss what the stock market of politics is saying about the U.S. national election outcome. John, it's great to see you again. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thanks for having me back on.
And remind the audience what PredictIt is and how investors use this kind of data.
Sure. So PredictIt is structured as a stock market for politics, where you can buy and sell shares in various outcomes occurring. So you can, for instance, purchase shares that Joe Biden will be elected president for 64 cents, in which case you put down 64 cents, and if he's elected president, you get $1. But if he's not elected president, you lose your 64 cents. And there's somebody on the other side of that trade who's putting up 36 cents, roughly, for the opposite proposition, that he won't be elected president. So about 300 different markets in which you can make these investments. There's a cap of up to $850 in any of these contracts. And people frequently will purchase multiple contracts in different events. And it's not just the presidential election, it's all kinds of other markets having to do with politics and the economy that are on PredictIt. So it's a real money, $1 winner take all contract market.
Which is so interesting. It's a little bit different than the polls because you're putting your money where your mouth is. So, you know, it always makes you wonder what the better predictor is. So let's talk about that. With the election just 8 days away, what is PredictIt data indicating regarding the national election? And what about the Dems winning the White House, Senate, and the House in 2020?
Sure. So, you know, it's so interesting because, as you point out, it's PredictIt as a market. The markets often throw off very accurate forecasts of future events because, after all, as you say, people have skin in the game. And it's different from polling. Polling is where you're asking someone what they want to have happen. With PredictIt, it's not what you want to have happen, it's what you think is going to happen. And it's an amazing thing when you put just even a little bit of money into a proposition that something is going to happen or not, it really clears your head and is designed to remove much of the emotion and the adrenaline and instead focus on the data itself. So PredictIt showing, you know, it's going to be, the PredictIt market shows has Biden at 64 cents, which is interesting because that's tighter than what some of the polls are showing. And so PredictIt may be a factor, which is, you know, having to do with traders taking into account couple of things. One thing they may be taking into account is the fact this may go to the Supreme Court, and the odds of something coming out of the Supreme Court are going to be different than what perhaps the electorate will vote on. So PredictIt has it also is about 50-50 proposition that it's going to be a Democratic sweep according to PredictIt, and in places like North Carolina where the race there with PredictIt traders has flip-flopped 6 times in the last 6 days. So it's really quite interesting where these tight races are showing one thing and PredictIt odds demonstrate that.
How does this compare to what you saw in 2016?
Sure. Well, I mean, the odds were, or the polling was in some cases accurate, but in other cases way inaccurate in 2016. And PredictIt was quick to spot the shift on election night when it about an hour ahead of the networks in spotting it. Nevertheless, markets are also sometimes wrong. You know, they can be overly optimistic or ebullient or overly pessimistic. But compared to 2016, traders think it's going to be a closer race. I think that's safe to say across the board. The PredictIt traders are not convinced that this is going to be a landslide.
Are there any other elections that are showing notable predictions?
Sure. Well, I mentioned North Carolina. Interesting, if you go to South Carolina, where you read the listen to what the pundits are saying and the prognosticators, you would think that Senator Lindsey Graham is fighting for his life. He may be, but PredictIt traders don't think so. They've got Graham over Harrison, who has raised a ton of money. They still think Graham's going to take South Carolina by 75 to 28. So,
Oh, wow.
And then you've got, interesting also is in some of these other races like Michigan and Arizona. Michigan, there is a question as to the quality of the campaigns, and predicted traders seem to think that the candidates that are running the more competent campaigns are going to, and more experienced campaigners are going to do just fine. Same with Colorado, with Governor Hickenlooper.
Yeah, that's just, the South Carolina race is just mind-blowing to me. It's very, very different than what we're hearing in the national news and what some other pundits are predicting. I mean, that really is quite a big disparity. So it's going to be interesting to see how these all play out. And before I let you go here, John, you also have some big news to announce regarding Predictus' relationship with NASDAQ. Tell us about that.
Sure. Well, it's really my pleasure to say that we now have NASDAQ is now the exclusive data distributor for predicted event futures market data. We are thrilled that they're going to be the administrator arm for the data, and it's going to allow us over at PredictIt to focus on growing these markets and putting up additional markets that we think traders are going to be interested in. The data already is heavily relied on for research and insights, and we're excited to sort of formally introduce the PredictIt data to a larger market. Each of the markets are real-time data for which NASDAQ will be representing the data to the investment community. So we're thrilled to have this relationship, and we're looking forward to broader use of the data by the investment community.
Yeah, that's great. Certainly exciting.
Providing this to the educational institutions. There are about 200 universities around the world that get the anonymized PredictIt trader data. So we'll be coordinating that with NASDAQ as well.
All right, John, great to see you. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thanks for having me on. See you next week.
You got it. And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at NASDAQ.